Picture this. The dining room smells like sage, roasted turkey, and that very specific brand of anxiety that only exists in late November.
Oh, yeah. We all know that exact smell.
Right. The good china is out. You're sitting there chewing on a perfectly acceptable piece of celery, feeling, completely centered.
You've done the internal work. You are ready.
Exactly. You are zen. And then Aunt Carol leans across the table, fixes you with a stare that could melt lead, and delivers the double-barrel, armor-piercing question.
Here it comes.
She says, "So still single? Any leads on a real job?"
Ouch. Yeah, that's a direct hit.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you feel that sudden hot spike in your chest, right?
Yeah.
That instant evaporation of all your carefully cultivated inner peace.
Just gone in a millisecond.
Gone. So if you've ever read a self-help book, felt totally enlightened, and then immediately lost your mind at a family dinner 3 hours later, well, welcome to part 2.
Yes. Today, we are moving from the laboratory into the wild.
Because in part 1 of our deep dive into the Emojji-verse materials, we mapped out the internal architecture, right?
Right.
We established the AV1 position.
The autonomous variable, exactly. We talked about how to construct an airtight internal framework, but, concepts are clean.
And human beings are incredibly muddy.
They really are. So today, the mission shifts to interpersonal systems. We have to decode the mechanical failure that happens when our perfectly engineered mindsets just collide with other people.
Especially those deeply ingrained, chaotic relational fields of family members.
Right. And we're going to use the framework's ultimate solution for this, which is compassionate boundaries.
Okay, let's unpack this because we can't just jump straight into the Thanksgiving disaster.
No, we need some build-up.
Yeah, to understand why the system collapses so violently under the pressure of family dynamics, the text actually argues we have to look at low-stakes environments first.
To see how the internal integration fractures when it's just you and a minor inconvenience.
Exactly. And the source material provides 2 incredibly vivid case studies of this solo system failure. The first one is what I'm calling the IKEA collapse.
Oh, this is a classic.
It really is. So since we already established the event atom and the AV1 baseline in the last deep dive, we can see exactly where the narrator goes off the rails here.
They decide to assemble an IKEA bookshelf.
Right, the blag. And they try to use the framework's 11-step operational flow to do it.
Which, right off the bat, represents a fundamental misunderstanding of top-down cognitive processing.
Totally. They are trying to force a rigid theoretical structure onto a volatile physical reality.
Yeah, so they initiate step 1 of the flow, which is defining the event atom. They literally stand in their living room and internally declare, "I am a master of particle board."
I love that. They're just hyping themselves up using systems theory.
Exactly. They are trying to solidify their AV1 position through sheer linguistic repetition.
Like a mantra. Okay, so then they move to step 2, duality. The text defines this as mapping the relationship between the self and the obstacle.
Me versus the instructions.
Right, me versus the instructions. But the instructions contain no text, just, that little cartoon guy holding a hammer and shrugging.
Which is infuriating. The somatic friction begins immediately there.
The wince. And then comes step 3, synergy. The integration of the parts. And this is where the entire internal architecture just disintegrates.
Because they are missing dowel 4B.
Yes, the crucial little wooden peg. And the narrator doesn't just get mildly frustrated. The text describes them essentially collapsing onto the rug.
Just clutching an Allen wrench.
Clutching the wrench, staring at this partially assembled, dangerously leaning shelf, totally defeated.
And the clinical diagnosis the text applies to this collapse is fascinating. It states the traveler, that's the narrator, defaulted into an X1 iterator first mode.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually mean in practice?
So in cognitive behavioral terms, this is when an individual demands that external reality conform to an internally reiterated mantra.
Like, I'm a master builder. I'm a master builder.
Exactly. They keep looping that thought, operating under this massive delusion that physical matter, the particle board, will just bend to their conceptual will.
They are actively ignoring what the text calls the delineator.
Right. The delineator being the hard boundary of reality that pushes back.
The missing piece of wood. It doesn't care about your mantra. And the text introduces a really critical concept here that we need to define for the listener.
The capacitant shadow.
Yes, the capacitant shadow. The idea of being a master builder or being perfectly zen or being highly productive, those are all just capacitant shadows.
They possess the capacity to interface with reality, but until they actually do, they are just ghosts in your prefrontal cortex.
They hold zero independent agency. You can iterate the concept of being a builder thousands of times in your head.
But without dowel 4B, the concept cannot actualize. It's impossible.
So when the physical absence of the dowel intersected with that rigid internal demand of the iterator first mode, it triggered a systemic crash.
The system didn't fail because IKEA is difficult. It failed because the narrator's architecture was arrogant.
Ooh, arrogant architecture. I like that. It completely lacked the flexibility to account for the delineator.
Which naturally brings us to the second case study.
Right, because we move from the inanimate pushback of a wooden dowel to the active, unpredictable agency of strangers, the traffic jam meltdown.
The ultimate test of patience.
So the narrator is stuck in gridlock on the 405 freeway, total parking lot.
And they decide to deploy what the text calls one-over logic.
Yeah, they lean back in their seat and construct this elaborate internal narrative. I am the climate, not the weather. I yield to the traffic. I am one over traffic.
They are actively positioning themselves as the constant variable.
The one, floating serenely above the chaotic denominator of the Los Angeles commute.
It is a theoretical attempt at maintaining the AV1 state under environmental stress, but the underlying mechanism is totally flawed.
Which becomes immediately apparent when the inciting incident happens.
The threshold guardian appears.
Yes. A BMW, acting as a chaotic external variable, violently swerves into their lane without signaling.
And the so-called unity operator shatters in a millisecond.
It just shatters. The narrator rolls down the window of their Honda Civic and screams, and I'm quoting the text directly here, I am the storm. R1V mode activated. Use your blinker, you unintegrated heathen.
It's such a hilarious image, screaming about integration while completely losing your mind.
It really is. But looking at the text diagnosis of this, they call it spiritual bypassing. And I want to dig into the actual mechanics, what that means in this context.
Sure, so spiritual bypassing is a term originally coined in the 1980s, but the emoji-verse text reframes it mathematically.
Right.
The driver was not genuinely surrendering to the reality of the traffic. They were constructing an intellectual bypass to avoid the somatic experience of anger and helplessness.
So the one-over logic wasn't a state of true acceptance.
Not at all. It was a psychological painkiller, a Band-Aid.
I was trying to visualize how this works internally for the listener. Think of it like building a state-of-the-art, entirely soundproof room directly on top of an active fault line.
That's a great analogy.
Right. You sit in the room, it's completely silent, and you tell yourself, I have mastered the environment. I am at peace.
But you haven't dealt with the tectonic plates beneath you.
Exactly. The silence is entirely artificial. So when the earthquake hits, when the BMW swerves, the soundproof walls don't protect you from the foundation cracking in half.
Because the BMW driver is what the text calls a threshold guardian.
An external force that tests the integrity of your foundation by triggering a wince.
The wince is a crucial somatic marker in this entire framework. It's not just a feeling of mild annoyance.
It's a physiological alarm bell.
Exactly. Your nervous system, specifically the amygdala, registers a sudden clash between your internal expectations and the external reality before your conscious brain even processes the event.
The wince is the tremor from the fault line.
Now, according to the text, the moment that wince occurs, the narrator is supposed to initiate the noticing protocol.
Right. That's a 5-step sequence. Catch, name, locate, check, adjust.
Catch the physical sensation. Name the cognitive distortion. Locate where the tension sits in the body. Check the narrative against objective reality. And adjust the systemic output.
Okay, but I have to push back on this a little bit. Looking at those 5 steps, isn't the noticing protocol just an overly intellectualized way of telling someone to count to 10 and take a deep breath?
I mean, I can see why you'd say that. It seems that way on the surface. But the underlying neurological mechanisms are vastly different.
How so?
Counting to 10 is a suppression tactic. It is simply delaying a reaction while the physiological arousal, the anger, remains really high.
And you're just holding your breath.
Right. But the noticing protocol is an active cognitive reappraisal. By forcing the brain to name and locate the somatic response, you are actively shifting blood flow and electrical activity away from the reactive amygdala and into the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow. So you are engaging the parasympathetic nervous system not by ignoring the anger, but by dissecting it.
Exactly. But because the narrator had bypassed their genuine emotions with that soundproof room of one-over logic, they had no access to the prefrontal processing required for the protocol.
The ego felt the tremor, panicked, and snapped immediately into responsive one-variable mode, R1V.
They totally forfeited their autonomy, and the math the text provides for this exact moment is highly illustrative.
Yeah, let's break that down. It's traffic rage equals ego over 1 times 1 over BMW driver.
Let's translate that math for the listener, because the fraction is the core of the metaphor here.
In mathematics, the denominator is the foundation. It dictates the size and nature of the pieces you are dealing with.
So by flipping the fraction and putting the BMW driver in the denominator,
The narrator's literally making a stranger's bad, driving the foundational reality of their own emotional state. They are structurally handing over their agency.
which perfectly sets the stage for the primary conflict of this whole deep dive.
Right. If an artificially constructed integration collapses under the minor stress of a missing wooden dowel or a careless driver,
What happens when we expose this fragile architecture to an environment loaded with decades of historical triggers?
deeply entrenched attachment patterns, and complex systemic feedback loops, the family holiday table.
Yes, we are finally entering the Thanksgiving relational field.
The text paints such a visceral scene. We are at the table and we meet the ultimate threshold guardian, Aunt Carol.
She makes the BMW driver look like a minor speed bump.
She really does. She leans over the meticulously carved turkey, locks eyes with the narrator, and asks the question we started with.
Yeah.
Still single? When are you getting a real job?
Aunt Carol is delivering a highly targeted historical wince trigger, and the text notes a fascinating evolution in the narrator's response here compared to previous years.
Because the historical pre-framework reaction was pure dissociation.
The narrator would just stare at the stuffing, trigger a flight or freeze parasympathetic response, and self-soothe by consuming carbohydrates until they physically couldn't process the emotional discomfort.
Classic avoidance. Eat mashed potatoes until you pass out.
Exactly. But this year, armed with the vocabulary of the emoji verse, the narrator decides to engage.
They are going to establish a formal relational field.
So they take a deep breath, refuse the disassociation, look Aunt Carol dead in the eye, and deliver a line of dialogue that is so disconnected from human reality it feels like science fiction.
It's amazing. They literally say, Aunt Carol, I am currently occupying the autonomous variable 1 position. You are attempting to make me a responsive variable. Let us find the third in this relational field.
And Aunt Carol, who is operating entirely outside of this theoretical construct, simply blinks at them and says,
Pass the gravy.
it is an incredible anticlimax.
It really is. But here is my challenge to the text. I am looking at the mechanics of what the narrator just did. And technically speaking, didn't they execute the Part 1 instructions perfectly?
Walk me through your thinking.
Well, they identified the threat. They verbally anchored themselves in the AV1 position, refusing to become the responsive variable.
True.
And most importantly, they explicitly requested to seek the third, which the text defines as the mutual higher-level point of connection that transcends ego conflict. They ran the exact mathematical formula, so why did it result in a total interpersonal misfire?
That tension is the central thesis of Part 2. It highlights the vast chasm between cognitive comprehension of a framework and the actual somatic embodiment of it.
Knowing it versus living it.
Right. The narrator failed spectacularly because they engaged in the weaponization of Meta-Matics. They completely misinterpreted the function of Chapter K, Relational Mathematics.
Weaponizing the math. The text argues that the narrator thought they were building a bridge to Aunt Carol, but what were they actually doing?
They were constructing an intellectual fortress. Using highly specialized theoretical jargon in a casual, intimate setting is an aggressive defense mechanism.
It's a shield.
In psychoanalytic terms, this is classic intellectualization. The narrator felt the raw vulnerability of being questioned about their single status and their career, a genuine pain point.
And instead of processing that vulnerability, they threw up a dense wall of vocabulary.
Think about the mechanics of how jargon works in a conversation. It's an intimidation tactic.
If I suddenly start speaking to you in a language you don't understand, I seize the high ground. I force you into a position of confusion and inadequacy.
Exactly. And while Aunt Carol is trying to decipher what autonomous variable means, she is no longer pressing you on why you don't have a job.
I haven't transcended the conflict. I've just trapped you in my labyrinth.
It is spiritual bypassing cloaked in systemic theory. The narrator hasn't avoided the R1B state. They've simply masked their reactivity with a superior tone.
And the text demonstrates how fragile this intellectualization is with the ensuing gravy escalation.
Oh, the gravy escalation.
When Aunt Carol bypasses all the jargon and simply asks for the condiment, the narrator's fortress crumbles. They yell across the table, "The gravy is a capacitant shadow, Carol. It has no independent agency unless poured over the turkey of truth."
The turkey of truth. It's absurd, but if we map it back to the IKEA collapse, The structural logic is actually consistent.
Because just as the concept of the master builder was a capacitant shadow without the dowel.
The gravy is a capacitant shadow without the turkey. It's an accessory relying on a foundational base.
But screaming structural ontology at your aunt over dinner proves the framework has just become a barricade.
It proves a complete inability to engage with physical and social reality. You are debating the metaphysical properties of the gravy rather than recognizing the human being asking for it.
You know, the analogy that crystallized this for me while reading the source material is this. Imagine showing up to a neighborhood snowball fight.
Okay, I'm with you.
Everyone is in their winter coats, laughing, throwing snow. You decide you want to participate, but you want to ensure you remain perfectly integrated and unhurt.
So what do?
So you roll into the backyard inside fully armored military-grade tank.
An impenetrable defense.
Exactly. You pop the hatch, look at the neighbors, and say, I am occupying the armored position. Let us engage in the snowball field.
And technically, you are perfectly safe. No snowball can penetrate your armor.
Right, but you have completely ruined the reality of the game. You look absurd to everyone else, and most tragically, your overprotection has made it physically impossible for you to actually experience the joy, the connection, or the shared vulnerability of the snowball fight.
You are safe, but you have isolated yourself in a steel box.
That isolation is the direct result of a systemic misdiagnosis. The narrator brought a tank to a snowball fight because they profoundly misunderstood the nature of the environment they were entering.
The text formally introduces this concept as field confusion.
Field confusion, the inability to correctly read the relational baseline of the room. The test categorizes these environments into levels, right?
Yes, and the narrator marched into the dining room expecting, or rather demanding, a level 3 environment.
Define level 3 for us.
A level 3 environment is conscious co-creation. This is a highly specialized relational field where all participants are mutually aware, emotionally regulated, and actively striving to build the third together.
It requires shared vocabulary, shared intent, and a high degree of introspective capacity.
Exactly. It is the environment of a deep therapeutic intervention or a highly evolved partnership.
But the Thanksgiving table is definitively a level 1 environment. The text calls this unconscious broadcasting.
Aunt Carol is not a level 3 operator running a sophisticated psychological attack on your AV1 baseline.
She is simply executing rote programming. When she asks about your career, she is broadcasting internalized generational anxiety, societal scripts, and her own unexamined conditioning.
She is a radio tower transmitting a signal completely unaware of the frequency she is on.
So the friction occurs because the narrator is demanding level 3 engagement from a level 1 broadcaster.
And the text provides a remarkably elegant axiom for this. It says, you can't force a stream to go viral.
Oh, that's good. You cannot mandate transformational depth where the systemic capacity for that depth does not currently exist.
You just can't.
I want to pause the analysis for a second and hold a mirror up to you, the listener, because this is the trap of anyone who consumes deep dives, reads psychology, or does the internal work.
It happens to everyone.
You learn new framework attachment styles, boundary setting, the emoji verse, and you suddenly expect your 70-year-old relatives, your coworkers, and the barista at your coffee shop to operate at a level 3 consciousness.
There is an inherent blinding arrogance in learning a new emotional language and then getting angry at the people around you for not being fluent in it.
It's so unfair.
It is an arrogance rooted in insecurity. The new framework feels fragile to us, so we demand the external world validate it by participating in it.
But understanding field confusion forces a radical acceptance of reality. The Thanksgiving table is level 1. Aunt Carol will broadcast.
The objective is no longer to elevate Aunt Carol to level 3. The objective is to navigate the level 1 environment without losing your own AV1 integration.
Which brings us to the culmination of the text. The actual practical solution. If we can't scream about the turkey of truth,
Please don't.
and we can't dissociate into the mashed potatoes, what is the integrated maneuver? The source material calls it the compassionate boundary.
This is where the theoretical architecture finally proves its utility. The compassionate boundary is the synthesis of autonomy and relationality.
The text gives us the exact phrasing to replace the jargon-heavy disaster. The correct response to Aunt Carol's probing question is simply, Aunt Carol, I'm not discussing my career today, but this turkey is fantastic.
On a linguistic level, it sounds almost pedestrian. It's so simple. But mathematically, structurally, it is a masterclass in relational navigation. Let's deconstruct the mechanisms at play in those two clauses.
Let's do it. The first clause is the boundary. I'm not discussing my career today.
This firmly anchors the AV1 position. You are defining your delineator. You are stating clearly and without justification that you will not become a responsive variable to her inquiry.
But the critical difference here is the absence of systemic exposition.
Exactly. You are not explaining why you are setting the boundary, nor are you lecturing her on her attempt to trigger you. You are enforcing the architecture without revealing the blueprints.
The door is closed, and it is locked. But you don't spend 20 minutes explaining the internal mechanism of the deadbolt to her.
No one wants to hear that. And then comes the second clause, the pivot or the compassion.
But this turkey is fantastic.
Neurologically, this is profound, isn't it?
It is. Setting a firm boundary often triggers a mild threat response in the recipient, a micro-rejection.
Right, they feel pushed away.
So by immediately pivoting to a genuine compliment, you offer a dopamine hit that offsets that rejection.
Yeah.
You are actively yielding to her level 1 reality.
You acknowledge her presence, you validate her contribution to the environment, the food, and you provide a safe, accessible topic for connection that requires zero transformational depth.
You are playing catch with the snowball instead of firing the tank cannon.
That's it, exactly. The text leaves us with a brilliant summary of this dynamic. Architecture is identity, not vocabulary.
It's a powerful statement. Your internal framework is exactly like the foundation of a house. It is buried deep in the dirt. It stabilizes the entire structure when the storms hit, when the earth shakes, when Aunt Carol starts broadcasting.
But you do not invite guests into your home, drag them down to the basement, and scream at them to admire your poured concrete footings.
You allow the foundation to do its job silently, so the guests can simply enjoy the living room. When the architecture is solid, the need to verbalize it completely vanishes.
And the final visual the text presents replaces all those chaotic equations of part 1 with a very elegant, simplified graphic.
It's an image of the Thanksgiving turkey, and written across it is the fraction, 1 over Aunt Carol.
It is the successful application of the 1 over logic that failed on the freeway. You become the constant 1 over the situation.
But unlike the spiritual bypassing in the car, this fraction acknowledges the reality of the denominator.
You yield to the reality of Aunt Carol's level 1 broadcasting, maintaining your structural integrity while allowing her to remain exactly who she is. The relational field is navigated, not conquered.
This has been an incredible arc to track today. We have journeyed from a narrator sobbing on an IKEA rug over missing hardware,
to a terrifying display of rage at a BMW driver,
to the ultimate absurdity of screaming about the capacitant shadow of gravy. And the through line connecting every single one of these systemic failures is the violent friction that occurs when we attempt to force an internal idealized concept onto a complex, non-compliant external reality.
The progression demonstrates that true mastery of any framework, be it the Emojjiverse or any psychological model, is measured not by how fluently you can speak its jargon, but by how invisibly you can deploy its principles in the face of active resistance.
So here is the immediate application for you, the listener. The very next time you find yourself in a complex relational field, whether it's the holiday table, a tense board meeting, or just navigating a crowded grocery store,
And you feel that somatic wince, that immediate spike of defensive heat in your chest.
do not default to the tank. Run the noticing protocol internally. Catch the physical sensation, name the cognitive threat, and then, rather than erecting a wall of intellectualization, execute the compassionate boundary.
Protect your integration with a firm limit and immediately offer a pivot to safe, level 1 connection.
Hold your ground, but complement the turkey.
It really is the highest form of relational intelligence.
I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative angle to consider as we wrap up this analysis. We have spent this entire deep dive examining how to defend your internal architecture against external threshold guardians.
We've analyzed how to manage Aunt Carol's unconscious broadcasting.
But I want you to flip the lens for a moment. Examine your own relational fields. In what specific areas of your life are you the Aunt Carol?
Oh, that requires a high degree of self-audit.
It really does. Where are you operating as a level 1 environment? Where are you unconsciously broadcasting your own unexamined anxieties, your rigid expectations, or your generational scripts into someone else's space, forcing them to exhaust their own energy, putting up compassionate boundaries against you?
It is a deeply uncomfortable question.
But it's the necessary next step in the work. Thank you for joining us as we explore the outer edges of the Emojjiverse. Keep your foundation strong, keep your boundaries compassionate, and good luck navigating your relational fields.